Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this session. This space has been designed or set up to discuss participative construction of alternative narratives on care and tax and gender justice. I'm Kayla Guerrero. I am part of Latindad and for the Tax Justice Network for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I will be your moderator today. Now, we're going to give people just a couple minutes to sign in, and by 9:05, we will begin with the agenda. Thank you. See you in about 3 minutes. Okay, once again, welcome. We're going to start now. Thank you for being here on time. I would like to reiterate how glad I am to have you today in this virtual space called Participative Construction of Alternative Narratives regarding care and tax and gender justice. I'm Clelia Guerrero, and in the Latin that section of tax justice, which is also within the Latin America Tax Justice Network for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I will be your moderator today at this session of the Global Days of Action for, for Gender fairness and justice, and tax justice, or for tax justice, promoting gender equality, which is created by the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. Before we begin, I'd like to share, or well, I'd like you to know that we have simultaneous interpretation available for Portuguese, English, and Spanish. I will be speaking in Spanish. The panelists will be sharing their content in Portuguese. And if there is any participant that needs a translation into English, it is available. And you can find the option for this in the globe icon below in your Zoom interface. I would like to also kindly greet our co-organizers who are INESC and the Tax Justice Network, with whom we have built a very fruitful and useful alliance regarding the work that we are about to share with you. So thank you for joining us, for helping us in bringing this proposal forward, and to be open to sharing your progress in the process. This organization has set a few objectives, among them us discussing or highlighting what we have learned, uh, mobilization strategies as well, which strategies have worked and which ones have room for improvement regarding the experiences associated with preparing and presenting proposals for the convention for the elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women, both in 2024 as in 2025. This space is designed to attempt to build a participative dialogue where we bring together all the perspectives of all of us together regarding all of these processes and how their impact could be increased. In addition, this is a space that calls us to strengthen collaboration, well, regionally and internationally, since building bridges and communication not only among governments but between and among organizations to bolster fiscal policy, tackling these structural differences is key. Likewise, we could explore some steps to take or recommendations so that we can move forward in transforming the tax system, particularly to contribute to eliminating gender inequality, which particularly touches our region, but the whole world as well. So, for this meeting, we have designated a panelist, a short panel, where each intervention will last about 10 minutes. I will present our panelists as they come into the agenda, and afterwards, we hope to have a space for dialogue with a Q&A. But before we get to that point, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the Zoom chat, and we will answer them after the panelist presentation. So if you have any questions or doubts or experiences, please feel free to share them in the chat, and we will have a few closing words of reflection in the end. So just start. Our first panelist will be Carmela Sigoni. She's part of INES. She is a doctor in social anthropology and political consultant in the organization at the Institute for Social and Economic Studies. Her work is centered in monitoring public budgets for policies addressing women, racial equality, and the rights of indigenous peoples, open government democracy, and educational processes with social movements. Carmela will present to us some of the results of this process that I just mentioned. So, Carmela, you have the floor. You have 10 minutes, remember, and welcome. Buenos días. Oh, good morning. Here in Brazil, it's 11:10 in the morning. I wanted to thank Clelia for bringing forth this participation space. I am speaking to you from Brazil. So, within that objective of thinking of the lessons that we have learned and the incidents and advocacy about the subject, I was looking at something that I wrote, but I didn't really quite get it. But well, regarding building narratives about political incidents and movements, the aim of our institute that has a lot of experience in this area. We are an NGO in Brazil, 45 years old, working with democracy and human rights, and at which at its heart analyzes public budget about several topics: children, education, environmental issues, women, racial equality, and so on. So we analyze a lot of areas. Actually, to work with our fellow social movements or NGOs, we work together with them to subsidize uh, political differences and incidences. So I think it's important to speak from this point of view because we are a feminist women's organization. This and this and we have 90% women, and also in the Speak, which is a feminist organization, and we have allies within our different struggles. So now I'm going to talk to you about care policies and about our experience on incidents and how tax justice and gender equality can come together or do come together in at our organization. As you know, in Brazil, we we were created through colonization, and we have a very strong racial component in our history, which is very important in how we perceive inequality. Remember, it's very important to discuss that topic as well as other conditions that create inequality, such as disabilities, as well as other forms of discrimination. However, race is a fundamental piece of inequality and within the structure of our social organization, and also structures how privilege is reproduced even from the state itself and after the foundation of the republic and our democracy. For our 1998 constitution, that did not solve that problem, that constitution. So we worked with that three-point idea of class, gender, and race. And when we see that the international agenda has a lot stronger focus on race, we continue to work to have all three access to come together. So, and in 2014, the INESCI launched its first study on taxes and fiscality with a gender and racially based report, which you can see at our website. And it was based in the cross information of our national census with other research on budget, family budget, and the national poll and the sampling of homes. And in that 2014 census and poll, it was shown that the poor in Brazil had were using 32% of their income to pay their taxes, while the richest 10% was only paying 20%. And at the time where we included the race and gender into the when we put them into the mix, we saw that Black women were proportionally paying more taxes than any other subset of society. So now, based on that, we are associated with women's and feminists and Black women's movements to disseminate that information. So that was a very extensive and dense investigation and analysis at the economic level. And we took that message from that. And that was a learning process that was very useful, which was to take the message that Black women proportionally pay more taxes in Brazil, which was very shocking because when we spoke with the other movements and the media, we made a communication effort, and this fact was added to the narrative regarding Black women, and despite all the topics of rights regarding health, reproductive and sexual health, and violence, which is so particularly intrinsic here in Brazil because of the use of firearms, which is which is used against Black youth, which over 20,000 Black youth are killed here violently in Brazil. So that is so we are seeing that as a part of the economic basis of the Brazilian economy. So after that report in 20, that's the report that we had in 2014, and then in 2015, with the political juncture that we saw that year, we had the expensive roof, which is a measure that froze social social policy investment in Brazil for 20 years. Nobody really understood why, because even MF, the IMF created a tactic against that measure. And there we brought together both narratives. We saw that Black women are paying more. And now we are not going to have any investment in public policy, despite the fact that they are the ones who are suffering the most violations and who have the most need for changes in public policy. And we create a narrative from those two issues. How do you collect taxes in Brazil, even though we know that taxation in Brazil is unfair? And we saw that there was also an injustice regarding fiscal austerity. So 10 years went by, and now Tax Justice Network, which is our ally, bringing us all together today, and along with Latin and the Tax Justice Network for Latin America and the Caribbean, brought us in so that we could defend this in Geneva. And now we have been working and researching with very old data for 10 years. So now we have to we need to do it again for 10 years. And sadly, as there has not been any public policy regarding taxes, the data remained the same. There were no new data. Uh, so we still have the fact that Black women pay more taxes, among other inequalities that were shown in the study, regarding even the colonial aspect of the country that I mentioned earlier. And because of that perspective that it's currently exists, that colonial inheritance and history, and we have white families with concentration of land and wealth. So we carried out those study again, and Carolina is going to tell us about what was the incidence, and we did a round table in Geneva with allies of belonging to Black women's Creole women, and I thank them for creating that space to discuss incidents. There has always been dialogue with those movements. And when we came back from Geneva, we held a meeting with several feminist movements that work within the territories. These are movements that are very rooted and which talk directly to women at the base. And we presented the result of the incidents, and they told us, wow, this is a very interesting report, but how are we going to discuss this with more women? We need to get into the agenda of social movements, because these agendas are very extensive, and they include food security, for example, facing violence, fighting against feminicide, and health and education. It's a lot of things. There are many issues that facing women, and we need to see how we can incorporate all of that and talk to more women about that, because this is also a learning process and a debate that needs to be had. Now, we have a publication that we're going to show you very shortly. However, before we get to that, and I am done with my 10 minutes. I'm going to ask one more minute just to tell you how this is reflected in our care policy. Once again, we have a fiscal austerity issue. So this first law did not go through. However, we have a new bill that has been presented, and we see so we see financing that impacts women. We have a consumption tax, and we have and the convention on family wealth did not go through. So the Lula government created initiatives in 2003. We had public hearings in which we participated, but of which we were critical because it's a very reduced group, and access is very restricted in Brazil to these kind of sessions. But many meetings were held, which are very positive, and we saw an incidence at the parliament, including policies for national care in 2024. And that year, we will create, or the plan that to be created will appear in the budgetary planning, but we still don't know who will finance them if the resources continue to be cut. So what we are currently fighting for is that this tax aid can be a source of resources for that purpose. I know that I'm going over time, but here you have a part of our publication, and we have inequality in the pocket, which is a guide for social inequality for Brazilian women. The idea is that this is a material telling this story of three women, mom, grandma, and daughter, and the challenges they are facing regarding fiscal inequality in Brazil. I invite educators any educators who are here in the room for you to read this material. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carmela. Wanda Montero was asking, and I just left the link right there in the chat regarding the publication so that you can learn a little more. Now we have Carolina Finette. And before we introduce her, I wanted to briefly mention something you said, Carmela, which is precisely in studies that were done with the FRCI, I need to see the response to COVID and the pandemic. There were many measures taken in each country, in a very huge list of measures. But when we checked budgetary issues, from the number of measures taken themselves, the measures covering women or families were over half, but in budgetary measures, I cannot tell you the number, but it was a one figure number, so it was less than 10%. So that shows us that even though our societies have good intentions policy-wise, it doesn't really translate into financing, as you just mentioned, Carmela. And that is one of the great challenges that our society is facing. So closing that parenthesis. So now I want to welcome Carolina. So Carolina is part of the Justice Network. She is a researcher and an activist in human rights and education. Her, her professional trajectory includes research, international mobilization, policy assessments, and teaching. She has special interests in how tax issues can support human rights, public services, and social justice. Welcome, Carolina. You have the floor. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing this space with me. and for including me in this agenda. I think that this work specifically that we're doing jointly with the city and in Latin America and the Caribbean has been very important work, not just for what we are bringing in regards to fiscal support for women, but also because of such important learning that is being brought over, not only for us, but for the group per se. How can we refine our advocacy strategies, our strategies in the way of connecting with movements, and how we can bring our guidelines in a more effective manner within these spaces? I want to share a little bit of our actions within this. We participated in Brazil's review. I will tell you how the process was like and the challenges that we found along this path and some of the lessons that we had in the past years of work. Because even uh, during many years, there were changes in data, etc. So after that, I will show you some links on the document that we have so you can have access to it. And also, uh, everybody here can look at the information on the review, the documents that were related to this process, which can help us to have a broader vision on how this process works. But in this case, the people who are providing this support sometimes don't know how the process works. I will talk to you very quickly about this. So basically, the Convention Against All Types of Discrimination Against Women is a convention created between the countries to be able to determine the rights of women. And the countries, after the moment where they sign this agenda, they need to go through a review process. They need these mechanisms to work for the countries to be able to show and be accountable and show the defense of the rights of women. This was what we wanted to do last year with Brazil, and together with our national and regional allies, and at municipality level as well, in the women's movement who are acting together with us. And what was a part of the process here? From the moment when we issued the report in Brazil, we saw that there were questionings in regard to the fiscal aspects, and there was no response from Brazil in regards to these questions. What happened? What is Brazil doing in this agenda? And precisely there is where we go in this advocacy, saying, okay, they asked, Brazil has huge problems related to this agenda. Nothing is being done. And here we have the information that we have. These are our questions, suggestions, and to facilitate the work of the committee to um, fiscalize this in Brazil. This is what we did as documents. Therefore, we had the opportunity to participate in Geneva, supporting this process in a dialogue together with the members of the committee, and also together with the delegation of Brazil, which was represented in diverse people within the ministries, mainly by the Minister of Women. And we also had the opportunity to convince the committee to be able to ask some questions related to our report. So instead of asking what is the agenda like, what are the next steps, what is the presence of the Ministry of Women, how is this being addressed within the ministry? And we know that this is something that isn't within the Ministry of Women. For example, it can be the Ministry of Treasury or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, with the convention that is managing all the fiscal matters. This was our work then. Some of the topics that I believe we can point out and highlight so that everybody who's participating here can complement this if you don't agree, or if there's anything that maybe I'm leaving out. But basically, a few things that I saw could affect the work of some organizations that want to be a part of this space. First, funding. The liquidity crisis of the UN has severely affected the participation of the movements within these spaces. Here, I am talking, for example, not only about the fact that sessions aren't more hybrid, because the movements, for example, that can't go in person, can connect to the sessions or sending their delegations for a specific matter. The discussions start little by little to become more closed and less inclusive. Additionally, the participation incentives of the movements were reduced. I don't know up to what point, I don't know if it still happens. Nobody was talking about this, but there was a certain financial incentive of the UN to make possible the participation of the movements, and that is not happening because of the crisis. And then, based on that, these places, when the meetings are held, don't have access. It's not just that they're expensive. Geneva, New York, it's very difficult for a small organization to be able to fund this trip. But there's also issues on visas because they can't participate because their visas are denied. So they can't participate on these events. So there's no possibility of having a diplomatic visa to be in these spaces. Also, and everything related to language, because even though there is a language, not all languages are included there. Even there were people for translation between the sessions. For example, in our case, in the Brazilian review, this translation was done by an organization that was supporting Brazil, but that wasn't given by the UN. So imagine how the Brazilian sector organizations can't communicate in Portuguese together with their committee. This affects severely the possibility for action and also the processes per se, because advocacy related there to the UN systems, which are very complex processes that many times they're not clear. They don't have a step by step. What's a committee that we're supporting? So many times looking for this information and trying to have a vision of the process is still a lot of work to try to really understand how this works, how we can have advocacy in this space. It is a difficulty that we face, try to learn how to deal with this space, where to have effective incidents, where does it make more sense for us to commit our efforts. And one final point is also related not only to the financial crisis, but along the members of the committee, many times they are overwhelmed. So there aren't a lot of people working in these spaces. So if you see, we need to have empathy for the people who are working there. The agenda isn't healthy. We can see the level of work, of commitment that involves so many people with a lot of demands. So we have to understand that we need to adapt. And there we went through what we did and what makes sense for us as a third sector, even to keep into consideration in our actions, bringing all of our information objectively and in a summarized manner. So it's not losing context or quality, it's just adapting how our message will be received. So, for example, in the report, let's think about it. Think about the Brazil editions. It's six countries at the same time. Each report, 6,600 words. They're close to 10, 20 pages and 50 reports per country, 25. Imagine the volume in the head of the committee member, what it's going crazy just by keying in the information. So we have a report with all the data. We're going to write everything down. Why can't we do one page summaries, summarizing the findings with suggestions that the committee member can bring? for the delegation. So bringing this to the committee so that they can understand what it is we're doing. Why are we bringing this and what can we do? Trying to bring an adaptation to this space, regardless of all the matters that I've mentioned, just to close. Why doesn't it compensate to participate in these spaces? Because even if it's very hard and many times it's very expensive. Because these spaces, it's few spaces where we have with the third sector, gives us a possibility of bringing demand, but that our country or the person who is trying to bring our message has the obligation to respond. I believe that this is one of the most important issues for the UN mechanisms so that we can demand. And then what are we doing? We have the power of using this space. We have the possibility that the UN can give us support in this advocacy and thus have a response. And based on that, not only the final project that is resolved, be able to use this. And this was their response. And as of that moment, develop our advocacy along the year and be able to charge, for example, okay, you said this, you said we would have this goal. I don't know anything in in a specific month, and then develop this, having a binding mechanism, something that we can use during the year to be able to ask or be able to be accountable for what's happened with this advocacy. So I believe that these are still mechanisms that are worth participating in, but specifically because of all these barriers of time that we need to study and understand, better understand, so that we can use the tool in a more effective manner and thus be able to bring our messages. Thank you so much, Carolina. I think that all of us, with the limitations that you mentioned, I believe that one thing that would add to specifically to fiscal justice, just these words are scary. So this sounds strange. But in reality, once we better understand what this is about, we can relate this to our day-to-day work and our civic work or a duty of being a part of the state and the laws and the public policies work for us. So I believe that there's also a call to open up to the possibilities of exploring not only fiscal justice, but any term or areas of knowledge, tools that that come up day to day. Every time that we can understand what they're about, we are possibly going to see ways in which they can support our work. So in that sense, I think this is an additional invitation that I would share. And now we have Maria Regina Paiva. Regina, thank you so much for being here with us. Um, in this case, we have wanted not only to share an experience, which is set up, but we should also find or explore some other possibilities, processes, and experiences and related issue. That's why we have here Regina. She is a fiscal auditor in the Federal Tax Administration, Director of Technical Studies of Sindifisco Nacional, and second vice president of the Institute of Fiscal Justice of Brazil. Her broad experience and her elaboration from proposals contributes a specific perspective during this debate. Okay, thank you so much. I apologize because my connection is unstable. I missed a part of Carolina's intervention because my internet failed and I tried to go in through my phone, but it was worse. I think it's a bit better. I think this is the first time my connection fails. It's not common. So I want to thank you for your invitation to the Fiscal Justice Network and to tell you that for me it's an honor to share here this discussion with Inés and Carolina and Carmela, who are organizations that have this powerful interface with the social movement to be to touch upon these fiscal and tax matters and budget matters that sometimes are restricted to a very closed environment. It's not that we're people supposedly with a lot of knowledge that can discuss and learn about or know and propose matters. And the work that Inés does, that we're doing at the Institute for Fiscal Justice, this shows that it is possible for us to be able to share this knowledge and these analysis with the population and society in general. Um, a question caught my attention that I would like to answer in these brief minutes of my intervention. And it's how can we find tax and fiscal policies that collaborate in gender inequality? And when you were talking about the NESCA study of 2016, I never forget this because it's, as she mentioned, it was a study that really um, touched us because we were able to verify that Black women paid more taxes. And why did they pay more taxes? Look, because taxing in Brazil, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America as well, is marked on consumption. It means that it doesn't matter how much you earn, you're going to pay the same tax. So it's based on consumption tax, what families have to buy. So people with low income are the ones that buy the most, and Black women are the ones who are in a social base, and therefore it's logical that we assume that Black women are the ones who pay the most or the highest taxes in proportion to what they earn. But of course, we cannot be, let's call this with our intuition. We also need the numbers. And I will congratulate you here for all of your work and the update that you did. And I would like to tell you very briefly here because it's what I worked on. I worked in tax administration. This is my area in which we can address these matters on two points of view. The first one is on income taxes for individuals, and the second one is the tax on consumption. And the Institute did two studies on gender equality that we can verify in these studies. First of all, we can see the number of taxpayers for income tax, and we saw that the number of men is higher than the number of women. And when we got to the highest income, we're talking about over 320 minimum wages in Brazil.
And we're back. I'm sorry for the bad connection. Okay, just to continue. The number of men filers is far larger than female filers. When we look at income in general, in this picture, we see that women earn less and practically at all income levels, they earn less, as well as in wealth accumulation. The accumulation of for men is about 70%, while women it's only 30%. We can see that for income tax, this difference is very marked. What can we do to improve that now that we're here? And how can we improve this? Regarding tax justice, we need to collect a little more because the largest share of the income comes from earnings and dividends that distributed, which are included in income tax. And given that men are the majority of people who receive uh, that benefit, and even though it's not something that is written, because gender or race really don't matter at that point. That tax burden that is carried by women is always a little larger, which which affects us disproportionately. That could help us give a very important step toward gender equality. And now I'm going to talk to you about consumer taxes. We know that in 2023 we approved a large tax reform here in Brazil on taxes only on consumption. At that time, we didn't really cover income tax. So with this reform, we saw an unusual situation. For example, products were linked to biologic production or reproductive work for women, specifically, they are more taxed than products for destined for males. Let me explain myself. So we saw a large difference. Let me check between condoms, for example. The total in consumption tax was 9.25%, and the use of birth control was of 30%. Then we have Viagra, which is for males, is an 18% tax. And so we can see that there is a very large, a very marked difference. For example, if we have a product, a burning prevention product for women for breastfeeding, that is specifically for women. In that case, we see a product that is, we're losing her. That product is within the same incidence, and in the automotive area, we see it cover 30%, which is also linked to male consumption. We can see that products aimed at women and self-care are more taxed than products consumed by a mostly male public audience. So there is no really there is no remediation for this implicit inequality in taxes. Women are the most affected in the cost of essential products for women, which relate to self-care. Or and we see that these products more highly taxed because women use them. So we have to ask if the taxing is higher because it is consumed by women, or because that extra tax is aimed at helping women in their work, particularly the reproductive work. And within this reform, we don't have a very conclusive study of how it's going to end up. But we have had a few advances in this reform. For example, it was not for free. It didn't just fall into our laps. It was the labor of intense work by many women who were there in Congress. And these women were or sent their studies or analysis to senators and members of Congress who participated in public hearings about this subject. and there were many hearings on the topic actually. We saw a few positive advances in that reform. For example, now we have in the federal constitution that it is mandatory to verify every 5 years on the gender issues and its impact on tax benefits granted in advance, because that is never has never been set in the constitution. Another advance was that the principle of tax justice is now a constitutional principle. However, we always need to materialize that principle. However, now it is included in the federal constitution. Another advance that we saw was that products aimed toward health a very reduced taxing. And at the same time, we saw the definition of the basic basket products, which are tax exempt. These products, which are linked with consumption, women in Brazil, for homes that are headed by women, they tend to consume more of these products. And that is good because these products are going to have a zero tax, which will reduce inequality in taxing. We are also foreseeing a tax refund system that already exists in some other countries. Here in my state, we already have it in place, actually. However, it's a very small amount because, for example, people who are at the level between a minimum wage or a bit more cannot really be benefited from it. So, on the one hand, let's say that we are aiming toward a more innovative sense or pathway in Brazil, but we still lack an effective regulation to benefit more people. So there we have these positive points, but at the same time, we have to ask ourselves what organs and entities are going to perform those impact assessments every 5 years, because we still don't know that. And something that is also not as amply discussed is that homemakers had their taxing reduced. And we know that women can be victims of feminicide, of course, with firearms. And this taxation on firearms which is very low, could favor an increase in firearms consumption, which is not good for women. Now, to wrap up, we have an assessment from the Tax Justice Institute claiming that the Brazilian government should have begun the income tax reform as announced yesterday, of an exception for people earning up to 5,000 reals. That was very positive, and that is a measure that we need to celebrate because it benefits people who earn less. But we know that we will have a great dispute in Congress, uh, while at the same time, the president of the delegates chamber is going to have this discussion, and the idea is to see that we're going to test this, but we want to reduce expenses, we want to make administrative reforms, so we don't really know how it's going to work out in the end. Many times we at the institute we thought that it would be better when the government had more political capital and to start with the income tax, because that tax, as I mentioned, if we tax dividends again, it could really benefit women. So the government decided do the consumption tax, which tends to favor the tax system in Brazil. But these reform proposals are based on this, on facilitating this, and in the principles of efficiency, transparency, and however, regarding equality, the government wishes to stimulate growth and to bring investments, which is very good for the country, of course. However, we see that basic gender inequality topics are still being pushed aside. I'm sorry. Just to wrap up, there's still a lot to do left. We need to interface with society to share these studies and analysis, so that this set not only of women and our feminist struggle is not just for women. We want a better world for everyone, not just for women. So once again, thank you for having this space and for having me. Thank you for all bringing us all together. And I am more than I'm available in case you have any question. I'm sorry for the connection issues. I think I forgot about half of what I was going to say because of that, but that's what happens because it's a very complex issue. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you, Regina, for sharing your experience and to leave us with a few reflections on the path forward. I would like to invite our participants to share any questions that they have or any reflections or perspectives on anything that we have said this far. Sadly, because of the webinar format, we really can't set up the mic. However, we have the chat option. Meanwhile, I'd like to ask each of you one thing. So, if there is there anything you would change in how we are generating these joint mobilizations? If you had a magic wand that you could just swish, and there's no political power, there are no budgetary restrictions, there are no time limits, what change would you make immediately in how our social movements are working these topics right now? Maybe we can start with Regina, then Carolina, and then Carmela, if you all have something to say. Well, that's not a very easy question to answer. I remember that a few years ago in Brazil, we weren't really talking about reducing inequality from taxation. We only managed that through public expenditure. So we need to have public policy and we need to invest in health and education, and that's how we're going to reduce gender inequality. So, just as Carmela mentioned, with the first study by INEX, we see that discourse began not that long ago. We have 40 years of neoliberal doctrine, quote unquote, not only in here in Brazil, but in Latin America. And we were forced to reduce expenses. And it was forbidden to even discuss the idea of raising taxes. We have already taken a great step in this area because we have very short time. Sometimes we couldn't really enter that space at all. And as the President Lula just said, he announced that measure of charging to the super rich, which is included in assessments. Yes, we want more, but it leaves the discussion to the society. It brings a topic forward, which is We need to collect more from people who earn more. That is even included in our constitution. And when we think of social movement, I think we need to be present in spaces. We need to be at the periphery, not only in the main cities. We can try to build, and we are going to do collective work here in Porto Alegre, where I live, which is Women for Sewing, doing. And there we talk about economic inequality, budgetary issues, and we think the language that we are able to work, we have to cover these spaces. We need to continue creating studies and analysis, but we need to be in this space. We need to go to the periphery cities and to the poorer communities and to make a bigger effort there. We have many activities in at the Institute for Tax Education. We have tried to go to those spaces to have our own narratives. And and I think we are on the right path right now. But I think the most important thing is not just it's not to get there, but the entire process to get there, which is not easy. It's a process that is ongoing. So I wouldn't really worry about what we need to change or what we need to do. I think we're already doing it, which I think is the most important part. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I think my internet is now being cut off. Now, Carolina, if you have anything to say yourself. Thank you for the question, Clelia. So thinking about this process of building incidents, if I could make a wish, it would be for us to have the presence of all movements present in at all process stages, not only because of the financial or time limitations, because there's no way to have all the people who are part of the process, for example, at Geneva, in Geneva, or somehow have everyone be present at every meeting. It's very complicated at the municipal level, at the regional and national level. Sometimes, and that's sad because it's difficult to bring different people at different stages, and so we are trying to do that. And somehow we have achieved that to bring the different visions to the all the spaces. However, if we could always have people with, who work at different levels and localities, it would be great. And surely that could aid the process forward. I think that would be excellent. Carmela, Carmela, yes, come on in. I think that Regina and Carolina really went into the main issues that I wanted to mention about access and the movement across spaces. That has happened a lot, even in regarding climate issues, where everything is being decided. Sometimes the people who are the actual people affected are not involved in the discussion, so it can affect women and children. And the instrumentation or instrumental mechanisms in Brazil need to be renewed because they are currently insufficient for our reality. So everything that we are doing needs the digital precarious digital participation because Brazil does really have big tech regulation. We actually have a very perverse dispute on the internet regarding content, and companies themselves are from the right, far right, is making they are making it harder to fight on these issues on the internet. So Brazil only had a discussion on the digital area regarding indigenous people, and if we don't have the technical language, it will make no sense. I think that to complement, m- internet is so bad that we need to go to the to talk in person with people. I think we need to motivate this conversation with with NGOs and with cooperation so that we can hold in-person activities. And that is a crisis. We cannot just be virtually present because people are tired. The conditions are cruel. And I think the government needs to participate in creating and create spaces for participation. And what do we need? Budget, and even in public policy.
Thus, with public policies and transparency, we never had investment. We have a good reputation internationally, Brazil, in regards to transparency, but who gives these data? It's the private initiatives, not the social movements. I think we should have this discussion of who participates, how they participate, to look at the women who participated more from the policies, from the female social health, education. But the indigenous peoples also want to talk about an economic model to discuss these climate impacts and these discussions that are affecting Brazil and this mining commodities export and all of these male policies of economy and mines and energy that have an impact on us. There were never a social object. There was never a conference to discuss the economic object that we should be doing now. Thank you. Thank you so much to the three of you for inviting us to dream. As I was just saying, um, we have two questions that I think are very concrete in the chat, in the Q&A. So the first one is from Wanda Montero, that she first thanks you for your presentations, and she's saying, Regina was mentioning a group of goods mostly consumed by women, like contraceptives and cosmetics. It's not clear to me if the taxing of these goods was reduced with a reform for the taxes on consumption tax for 2023, or if this is a future agenda. I think this is more your kind of question, Regina. Yes, it's a great question. I think I told you that no conclusive study was done yet after the reform. But at the beginning, in assuming that now goods and this merchandise that is basically the same for everyone, supposedly this difference tends to be reduced. But still, we don't have studies or conclusive analysis on this. At the beginning, yes. In principle, yes. But for example, we have the case of weapons. We have contraceptives. They were not placed in zero rate products, and they are female consumption products. There are some things that we didn't understand how they are going to lower their price, but I will owe you this answer because we haven't concluded this yet. Yesterday, I asked the group that is studying basically this matter, but we still haven't done this analysis. In principle, yes, several of the products have a downward trend and to be at the same level, but it's not all of them. Thank you so much, Regina. There's other experiences in other countries like Argentina where there was a lot of mobilization on taxes in female hygiene products, etc. And this was maybe one of the most successful campaigns along these lines. And I think that just the fact of asking ourselves if these differences exist in our countries is already a step forward. But clearly, we all have this homework of going back and reviewing this and seeing how this all ended up. The next question, thank you so much, Wanda, for your question. I don't have the name. The person's called Anonymous Attendee, but it says this. Is it possible that Lula takes an agenda for reforms for global tax governance to BRIC? And along the same lines, we keep driving the tax agenda in G20. Does anybody want to respond to this question? I can try to talk a little bit about the agenda. We have this hope that the agenda will be brought forward, for example, in the leadership that Brazil has in this agenda compared to last year. But some topics that I have are, for example, in relation to the change of the G20. Obviously, the influence of Brazil will be reduced because of this change in leadership. We don't know until what point it will be possible for Brazil to bring this agenda and how strongly it may. But for us, it makes sense that for this to have a continuity. But we know, for example, that there are other guidelines connect a bit to the UN Convention on Fiscal Matters, that there's a certain pressure in regards to financial flows. We don't know up to what point these agendas that have somehow been agreed with in this space, if they are also going to have this conversation between what will be prioritized. I think this is something that we should follow. And Brazil's leadership this year, we hope that the agenda continues very strongly. But it's difficult to talk about this because we need to have a bit more information to determine if this will be a strong agenda or not. We hope it will be. Thank you so much. I think this is our task right now, our homework. With the limitations from certain spaces, not only in access, but also sometimes even in language, interests, because sometimes it's a situation of connecting with the motivations of our counterparties and maybe aligning our discourse or the resources that we generate as well, or the spaces that we share. So I believe that I still want to take advantage of this question to remind ourselves of the task that we have in execution, as Regina said. And I think we don't have any other questions. So I'd ask us to do a closing round. I just wanted to compliment what Carolina was mentioning. Um, in regards uh, to the breakthrough. Here in the Institute, we send documents precisely so that Brazil can lead this fight for the triangulations and the foreign commission operations in these flows that where we're exporting some products and these resources aren't comprehensively received or they are not correctly taxed. We are trying as much as we can, as you mentioned, but it's very hard. When we talk about taxing of the richest, yes, I understand that Brazil will continue along this line because this proposal was presented yesterday. That is still shy from our perception, but it's along the lines of taxing the richest in the minimum tax, even inspired on this model that was from OECD, that is there to inspire the charges on the richest because the taxing that they are defending isn't meeting with our interests. Thank you. Thank you, Regina. Think that in this proposal of closing remarks, I'm going to take advantage of Regina's intervention to leave mine as well. And I believe that one of the challenges that we have, not just for those of us who mobilize, but also for those who do taxing and political uh, and tax policies in the countries. Each day we wake up and we live in a slightly different world than the previous day. Things are moving along so fast. The ways for production, the ways of consumption, the ways of doing transactions, technology, all of this makes things change so fast in such a short time that what we're doing in many ways is to try to reach this movement. And the response from our side is, I don't know if the word would be passive, but we need to define this because it's trying to be at the pace of the changes around us. And I believe that spaces like the United Nations Convention, like the tax platform for Latin America and the Caribbean, and spaces where we propose this dialogue and this coordination, not only between countries, but also between sectors, private, public, and civil society, help this response of ours to at least be a bit more, have less probability of failure in the sense that if somebody already tested something out and I can learn from that, I can maybe save myself some time. And I would like to also plant this little seed there. Let's become part of these processes. They are not processes that or they are processes that we dreamt about, but we never thought were going to be a reality in our generation, and it's happening. So let's be an active part of these processes. And sometimes they can be a lot. Sometimes they can have very extensive words and resources and complicated things, but that's also our task. It's being like mobilizing. That's our task as well. So that's on my part. I invite Carmela and Carolina and Regina to share a final reflection with us. Once again, I want to thank you for your interventions as part of the campaign of the Global Action Days. And I also want to thank, before I hand the floor, I want to thank the interpreters who are here with us. They've been very helpful for your support. Thank you so much. And thank you to the organizations who participated in this space, specifically uh, the Fiscal Justice Network, INESC, and of course the Fiscal Justice Institute that is part of this panel as well. So the floor is yours. Well, I'd also like to end by thanking you and leaving a few comments on the reality. I think that those of us who are from the organization, from the university, what we're talking about here, how can we expand these debates? Many of the trainings that I do, I find this question women ask, I pay taxes. Women from peripheral cities, women whose rights are being violated daily. This is a common question, so that we can look at the distance that we have in the debate and the importance of the social movement in that sense, which is collective and that can be strong in this debate. And I believe that another key is wealth distribution. We are talking about a population that works a lot and that isn't really seeing fruit of their work, being it services. We have research that's talking about the metal workers in Brazil. It's a horrible research that had a lot of impact in the networks, and there was a fight to reduce the work day because this is having an impact on our subject today, which is the care policy. And here we see what is care, what is happening where people have no time for anything. And this is what we're talking about. And many times people don't want to participate in these spaces because they're just exhausted, mainly women in the territories. I believe that this is a key for wealth distribution. All of these messages that are being sent to youth with all of this ideology of wealth, we are fighting against these topics because everything is connected. The fact is that we never had resources for the defense of the rights. That's the message. Thank you so much. And thank you, Clara. Thank you so much for this space. Thank you to all of you who are here. Thank you, Clara. And I believe that for me, it's important to talk about one thing that we all talk about, and it's about an invitation and maybe motivating everyone who's here with us to get involved in this agenda because many times I say this. I was a professor before I started working in this area, and I see that we have like a certain fear of talking about these situations, especially us as women, where many times people set these guidelines as a male guideline that maybe is placed as if it didn't belong to us. And here I want to motivate you to be brave. And let me tell you, this agenda talks about tax justice and economic justice, but it goes beyond diverse rights and aspects of our lives. So let's continue with this agenda. Let's continue appropriating these spaces and building together and bringing this agenda to different sectors. I was really very surprised to see the lack of knowledge on part of the Ministry of Women, in regards to this agenda, so that we can continue bringing this. And also looking at the possibility, in case that you want to contact us, or to look at your perspectives. I don't know if maybe we can share our emails, but I'm going to leave you my email so you can ask anything. If you want to give us some feedback, I think it's important to listen to the comments and your opinions. I want to thank you for your presence and your company. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carolina. I think that is, we also have Regina today. No, for her final impressions. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, other than thanking you for the opportunity for having me here, and I really like the participation of Carmela, Carolina. I didn't know any of you, and also Cleila. I would like to tell you that in this study that we did on taxing and gender inequality, even if we can see gender inequality in taxing, this study can conclude that taxing is a reflection of inequality in our country because the most amazing piece of data is how much is paid 10% more and how much does the poorest and the richest 10% pay. This is a problem that needs to be overcome in Brazil. Additional to gender inequality in taxing, we have a classic inequality that's very cruel in Brazil. But we have good news in all of this. Claudia was talking about this. And here in Brazil, we have a great opportunity right now, which are two great popular movements that are organizing a plebiscite on the rate of the large fortunes. And we're seeing a great opportunity that is very valuable so that we interact in society when this plebiscite uh, on, I don't know what the questions are. I don't know how this is going to be done, but I believe this will open a great opportunity to popularize debate so that society can be asked or invited to participate so that we can see this feedback, these opinions in the territories. I believe that it helps and it brings hope, and we are going to try to have this plebiscite in Brazil because everything that we were talking about has been in the Constitution since 1998 and it was never done. So let's see if now with a plebiscite we can take a step forward. Thank you so much, everyone, for those of you who are here. Once again, thank you so much. Just additional um, commercials in tomorrow between 9 and 10 in Ecuador and 11 to 12 Brazil. We are going to have a space where we are going to be talking about the intersections between gender justice, tax justice, and climate justice. So you are kindly invited to participate in this space. And there we will be sharing documents that have been generated both from Latin Lab as well as processes where we're participating in this connection with these topics. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and see you soon.